Hello, Issue Space community. This is Kat Addo, an inclusive social impact strategist and the creator of Issue Space, sharing a note with you about the episode you're about to hear. I wanted you to know that this conversation touches on themes that some listeners might find upsetting. The specific themes and their approximate timestamps will be noted in the show description of this episode so that you can skip these parts of our conversation if that's what feels safe and right to you. Thank you for listening and welcome to the space. Welcome to Issue Space. We are a podcast and community for everyone who's working to save the world. I'm Kat Addo. I'm an inclusive social impact strategist, and I'm the creator and curator of Issue Space. And I started Issue Space because every day there are thousands of us who get up and go to work in jobs that are meant to change the world through positive social impact. And we're taking on these huge human issues, conflicts, crises, injustices in the context of a 9-to-5, and largely without a lot of space to process what that is actually like, what it takes of a person and a professional to pursue positive change every day, 9-to-5. So I wanted to create a little bit of breathing room to do so. And whether you are a lifetime career person in social change work, or you're just curious about what it's like to be so, or somewhere in between, if you have ever felt unclear about what your role in social change is, or conflicted about making a living by making positive change, or exhausted by engaging with this emotionally draining, heavy, complex work day after day, or even just curious about what work looks like for you and if it's possible to make a sustainable, rewarding career that aligns with your values and makes the world a better place, this is a space for you. So welcome. I wanted to mention before we hop into the episode that I am beaming in from the studios of Multitude. Multitude is a podcast collective, production studio, and ad sales provider based in Brooklyn, New York. And I've just found them to be wonderfully collaborative and inclusive and community oriented. So if you are looking for a podcast partner and that sounds good to you, I recommend looking them up. All right. This episode of the Issue Space podcast is called Pain into Purpose, Making Change from Our Challenges. And I really wanted to hold space to acknowledge how many people in the professional change-making landscape are bringing their own lived hardships to the work. They are taking painful experiences, injustices that they've faced or witnessed, pain that's been caused to themselves, to their family, to their community, to their land, and converting that into energy that's meant to better the world, using it as a platform, a connection point, a story, a motivator to really help realize alternatives to those horrible things. And it's not a small thing to do, and it's not a given. It's a choice and an offering that a select few people make when thinking about how they want to use their time and talent. And I'll say for myself, when I moved into the social impact space about 8 years ago, did I already have a set of values and a worldview and a feeling about how you treat people in the planet before I came into the space? Absolutely, yes, I did. But what really tipped me over from feeling and thinking into deciding that I wanted to act and I wanted the bulk of my time and talent to be behind creating positive change was seeing myself, seeing people who looked like me, seeing people who looked like my family reflected in the injustices that were rising to prominence in the time. So in my story, what kind of tipped it over for me is if you think about 10, 12 years ago to some of the high profile instances of police brutality, it wasn't that this was new or that people, especially people in Black and brown communities, didn't already know about these dynamics, but social media was behaving in a way that was making it inescapable. And I really couldn't imagine compartmentalizing. I couldn't imagine going to work every day and stretching and pushing myself and investing of myself while in the background I had this very real fear and anxiety that should things continue to go in this direction, there's no guarantee that I or people I love would be spared. And so it went from this feeling of an abstract awareness of things that are wrong, things that are cruel, things that are in need of change, to a feeling of very high personal stake. And as I entered the space, I really found like a mix of motivators. Like there is a sort of goodwill. I think it's honor system if there's an altruism. I think everybody has to answer for themselves if they're showing up in the space altruistically, but there's definitely a sense of goodwill and solidarity among the professionals that you encounter. You see people giving the best of themselves, reaching into their networks, really giving their all on social causes that aren't necessarily 100% reflective of the lives that they've lived. But just as often, if not more often in my circles, I'm working alongside people who have really felt what the negative impacts of not pursuing positive change feel like. And it's a huge driving force, whether spoken or unspoken, in their work. And so it just kind of makes you wonder and realize, like, wow, how much of the professional landscape of social change is rooted in pain, is brought to you by fear, is brought to you by anxiety. And it's not a small offering to make, to bring your most vulnerable parts of self to bear, not just publicly, but every day, 9 to 5, on your desk, in your meetings, on the calls, in the activations. It's a very specific kind of professional experience. So that is what I wanted to hold space to discuss today. And I'm so excited because we have a conversationalist joining the space who I have been talking to and building a friendship with for years, but have been wanting to invite into a space like this for so long. We're joined by Adrienne Wright. Adrienne is the founder of Rosie, which is a boutique storytelling agency that serves partners of all kinds, organizations, coalitions, individuals, artists who are pursuing positive change in the world. Adrienne's also the co-founder of I Will Not Be Quiet, a learning community for women where they can come into safe spaces and through conversation, connect what's happening politically and what their opportunities for advocacy and civic engagement are to their lived experiences. So you can already see this drumbeat of bringing what your life is like to what action you're taking out in the world. And something that I really appreciate about Adrienne is that from the moment I did my little Google LinkedIn stalking, when you get put on on a professional blind date and they're like, oh, you should meet so-and-so, like that happened. We were connected through a mutual colleague. And I was like, let me see, who's this woman? Let me see. I was just struck by how much of Adrienne, the person, was presented in Adrienne, the professional, across the landscape of stories that I saw from her online. So I can't wait to talk to her about this complex experience of using pain in a positive way and a positive means. So I will invite Adrienne to say hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so delighted.
Oh, it is my extreme pleasure. I'm so happy that it worked out. I can't wait for people to hear from and learn from you.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Kat. This is amazing what you're building here.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so I have 1 billion thoughts in my head about what we could talk about, but
Bring it.
Before that, I gave a little bit of a window into who you are, or at least what you do professionally. And I'm wondering, since this is kind of like a conversation about work and calling and all of that stuff, what was your dream job when you were little? What did younger Adrienne want to do in the world?
Oh gosh. Younger Adrienne wanted to be an actress. Yeah, I wanted to be a storyteller. Growing up, my sisters and I had a very protected, careful environment that my parents put us in. And part of it is being daughters to immigrants, daughters to refugees, and being very careful of where we were in time and space. And, being in this environment, I began to learn just based on trial and error and response from my parents that the more that I listened and the more obedient that I was, the better the response that I got in being loved.
Mm-hmm.
And in response to that, I always kind of followed what they wanted me to do and what was being asked of me, and was not really able to come into my own voice, to be able to share what I wanted and needed, and to be able to express myself. And being in these environments, the one thing that I got to the outside world was TV.
Mm.
And being able to see other people telling their own stories, telling the stories of others, there was there were a bit of, stars in my eyes as a child of wanting to be in a position to be able to speak my truth and to share these grand narratives of thoughts and dreams and fears and hopes. And so seeing all of this, it was something that I always aspired to become.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny now, being in the position that I'm in, being able to tell stories for myself and for other people. It's come full circle a bit.
Absolutely. It is, you're providing like a broader clarity to me right now. I came from the music business, and I know so many folks where it seems like there's something that called us to both spaces. And that like what I wanted to be when I was growing up was a singer. Like I genuinely was on like a Mariah Carey path.
Love that.
Genuinely like so serious. And the reason I even moved to New York was to do a music business program at NYU, because my parents were like, that's cute, go to school. Like, absolutely not. Like, same thing. Immigrants, this is what you do. Like, get your higher ed, like, And so that was like my compromise. But hearing you talk about the why and this desire to tell stories and have like freedom and space to do so resonates with me so much, and makes me just think that it might be resonant to other people doing this kind of work about why we're a champion for storytelling in general. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. I'm like rooting for little actress Adrian too.
She comes out every now and then,
I love, we should do like a vignette after this. I love it. I love it. Well, you shared a little bit just about your background and some of the dynamics in your household, but I'm wondering, as much as you feel comfortable, if you could just bring us in complement to your professional self and the seeds of what you wanted to do, any color you can add to Adrian, the person. It might be something notable about places you've lived or how you grew up that informs your approach to impact work.
Yes. So I would say that to know me is to know my father, and he was a human rights activist in the Philippines, a youth organizer,
Mm.
and he had 11 brothers and sisters, lived in a very poor rice farm in the Philippines, and was just subjected to so much injustice where he lived. But one thing that was very true is that when he, would go into his like teenage years, he found himself organizing these underground activist meetings with other people in other villages to talk about what was happening, to talk about the oppression that they were experiencing and the powers that were subjecting them to all of this harm. And he was bringing people together to talk about what was their vision for the world that they wanted to live in, that may not happen in their lifetime, but could happen generations from now.
Mm-hmm.
And he organized the largest student protest, the largest youth protest in the Philippines, and led thousands and thousands of people into the president's mansion to demand for a better world.
Wow.
It's called the Battle of Mendiola. You can look it up.
Mm-hmm.
And he would tell me these stories when I was a kid. He would tell me about the friends he lost during that battle. He would tell me about the harm that he experienced. He would show me the gunshot wounds on his legs. He would show me the dent on his head from the police batons. And he would tell me about how he was wanted from, by the president. And so, out of fear for his safety, his uncle put him on a cargo plane and said, "Go, you need to leave." And the plane was supposed to go to San Francisco and somehow landed in New York City.
Hmm.
And so you imagine this young man who does not speak English,
Hmm.
who comes to New York City in the middle of winter without a winter coat,
Oh,
and
God.
he knows nothing.
Hmm.
The story that he would tell me is that he met this older couple. My dad's a very charming person, and he met this older couple who he just became friends with, and they took him in, and he said, um, I had love and hope at that time, and I still have love and hope today. Love and hope is what has saved me and what has saved generations of people who came before me. And if you have that, you have the whole world in your hands.
Hmm.
And he was able to build for himself what he thought at the time was the American dream. Ended up going to law school. He had children. He lived a life that was so much more abundant than what he had had growing up. And so as I got older, I lived and breathed these values of what does it mean to love? What does it mean to be in a community? What does it mean to dream and envision a world that is so much more grand than you, and yet it is within your reach? And I really kind of wrestled with this idea of this hope and this love and this sense of activism that ran through my veins with this immigrant mentality that you've got to listen, put your head down, get the good grades, don't ask questions. And they were complete polar opposites. How do you behave? You don't really know.
Genuinely.
Yeah, you do the best you can with what you have and what you know. And I my idea of success growing up was getting a corner office,
Hmm.
building as much wealth as I could. And I thought that was success. That was the dream, right? Maybe I can do that while, building the world that I want to see. So I would find myself at these really interesting companies, these media conglomerates that, did storytelling and in some ways did storytelling for good. And I found myself trying to climb up that corporate ladder. And I did climb up that corporate ladder. I did end up getting that corner office. But what I started realizing that the higher that I got up that ladder, the more disempowered I felt. Because at the end of the day, I was still living and breathing these narratives that were told to me of who I am and where I belong and what my place is.
Mm.
In that world, it was be grateful that you're here, be grateful that you're getting paid this much. And that's it.
Yep.
I started to realize that after many experiences of being in that for-profit space and being faced with a number of different injustices that have actually been there for a long time, I started to realize that if I ever wanted to live a life that was worth living, I needed to carve my own space out for myself and take my future by the hands and be who I felt like I wanted to really become. And the shift into social impact happened when I was pregnant with my oldest daughter,
Mm.
Lily, who is now 7 years old. And I was working at a tech startup that I thought was doing good work. And they had no maternity leave policy.
I see.
And I tried to make excuses for them. Oh, they're a young company. Oh, they're just, oh, they just haven't had many women become pregnant,
Mm.
which,
No red flags there.
no, yeah, no red flags there. But, you try to, when you're living in such a broken system, it makes you feel like you need to continue to make excuses for the system.
That's right. For the status quo.
Exactly. To continue to think about, well, how do I fit in instead of how do they fit in with me?
Wow.
Right.
Hmm.
And when I was pregnant with my daughter, I was fighting and fighting and fighting for this maternity leave policy that I knew ended up understanding that was never going to happen.
Hmm.
And I kept getting these responses from them that, well, when you're able to go on leave, like you're going to be going on vacation and acting like this was um the dream, the dream. I was still like,
That's adorable.
yes. Like,
That is the most precious misconception I've ever heard.
so I kept pushing myself to continue to work, pushing myself to do the best that I could at that job.
Hmm.
And when push came to shove after a work trip, I was so exhausted. I was walking up the brownstone steps to our apartment in Park Slope, and I fainted, and I fell right
Oh.
on my belly.
Oh.
And Lily was almost born. And she
Oh
was
my God.
24 weeks old. And I remember sitting there in the hospital, I was having contractions, and they said she has a 50-50 chance of whether she's going to survive. A few weeks later, after being on bed rest, I ended up delivering her 9 weeks early. And she was in the NICU for 5 weeks. And I remember when I was taking this like faux leave there, my direct report reached out to me and was like, I'm so sorry to be bothering you while you're on leave, but like I really need to talk to you. Like, hey, yeah, of course. Like what's going on? And she says, your boss assaulted me, sexually assaulted me, and I just don't
Mm.
know what to do. So of course I raise it to everybody, particularly the CEO, and they started making excuses for him and to the point of saying like, we've been to the principal's office 19 times in our career and people make mistakes. This is the most asinine responses. And I wouldn't put up with it. I refused to take that as a response and an action. And I tried to push that this is your responsibility to really handle this with care. And they ended up firing me. And that's when I knew that I am so tired of trying to bend myself, mend myself, and recreate myself to be someone who I am not. This box is much too limited for me. And if I wanted to be the person who I've always wanted to be, if I wanted to show up and teach my children what it is like to be your most authentic self, I needed to show up as that. And so I ended up pursuing legal action against them. I won, by the way.
There we go.
And started building my own path. And
Mm.
that's when Rosie was born.
Mm. Wow. Adrian, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I just want to hold a bit of space for it's just layers of hardship. It's layers of hardship. It's this generational seed that was planted in you that is beautiful and that has yielded beautiful things today, but that ultimately came from suffering. This is the unspoken thing. This is what there isn't time in the meeting agenda to discuss how much not just your own pain and the injustices that you face and the targeting and the lack of support, and your poor, direct report, how much all of that, in addition to your father's legacy and spirit, is standing behind you with each initiative that you get involved in this space. Like in some ways, I think I'm still in the phase where, do you ever just have moments where you're like, I can't believe this is like a job? Like on the one hand, it sounds a little bit natural. Like if I had to boil it down, like how should human beings behave? Like ideally, you would take your skills and your gifts, what you have to offer to sustain yourself and your family, and also to give back to the community and the world. Like that sounds like I see the logic of it. I see the values of it. But at the same time, work and the professional world, and even just hearing you talk about the corner office and what the culture there was like for you, which completely disregarded your humanity as you're literally creating life. You know, it doesn't get more on the nose than that. It's just not oriented around that mindset at all, which makes when you move into social impact work professionally, at least for me, I still have these moments of like disorientation where I'm like, this is both the work that should be the most compensated outputs that human beings create and can never be compensated enough because of all the layers of human experience that are informing you. And because just out of respect for how much bigger the stories and the efforts are than any one transactional thing we might be working on. You know what I mean? I'm sitting with the hugeness of what you've shared and just in humility, thinking about how many people are at work right now with their own versions of those stories and showing up and plugging away and clicking on their little Zooms and, you know, doing their little Outlook calendars with the same, but holding on to that same idea and that same sense of optimism that I can use this to forge a different path for myself and for the world.
You know, I think that in these moments of stillness and in these moments of darkness, that it pushes you to search for something that you cannot yet see. It pushes you to see what can be possible. And in these moments where I have had these very dark experiences, I've realized that I am not alone in this, that I've realized that, you know, there is an opening here, that there is a pathway. And um, a lot of it has been figuring out how do you get closer to yourself to sustain yourself through it, and to just ensure that you are continuing to strengthen that hope muscle that you have.
You know, what I appreciate and what I respect is that you're sharing this story with us now on a public platform, you know, kind of unapologetically, and you seem very rooted and grounded in just knowing where you stand and knowing that you've done nothing wrong in this equation. I've also read, and this was funny because I read this after I knew you. So I'd like looked at your LinkedIn, I'd looked at your Instagram and been like, wow, like she really brings all of herself to this work. I could see the intimate connection between the stories that you were sharing about yourself and the kind of work that you do. And then maybe as late as like a year later, I read the essays that you'd published in Marie Claire, and I think Elle was another one, sharing another of your stories about your own sexual assault and how that shaped your outlook on and advocacy work in reproductive rights, access, justice. Um, and I was just kind of in awe at the contrast of this darkness where you had seen some of the worst sides of human beings and who I knew you to be, which was this incredibly light, optimistic. I mean, how many times are we on a call, like talking about work stuff and you're kind of just like, relax, it's fine. It'll be fine. Calm down. You know, just this like really grounded, but always hopeful, you know, that rosy mantra, pun intended, about staying optimistic, about staying hopeful. And it just underscores to me the significance of that choice, that you not only didn't become embittered by things that you've been through, but you also didn't become shut down. You didn't kind of compartmentalize and say, these are some horrible things that have happened to me. I don't want to think about them. I want to continue chasing my corner office. I want to, you know, pursue a different path that distances me from what I've been through. Rather, you dived right into the heart of it. And I don't know what the experience was like. I'd love to hear. Have you had moments in your professional life where you consciously think, I have a story that is going to support this advocacy effort and it's imperative that I get it out? Or it could be both. Does it kind of just pour forth from you? Do you like I tend to be a sharer. If I feel safe and I feel respected, it's usually easier for me to be more honest than guarded. It's more comfortable and it's more natural. But I feel that I'm still in a place of it's a case by case. It's a conversation by conversation. Do I feel like sharing what I've been through? Do I feel like I'll be protected enough? I can protect myself, or others will protect me if I really open up to that radical vulnerability, which we're often kind of called to embody given the role of storytelling in social change work. But the way that you share your story and the level of vulnerability that you embody is more like a way of life. It's a way of being. It's a way of working. It's so consistent in a way that I'm just like blown away by. So I'm curious, like, what the experience of arriving at the storytelling is like for you. Do you actually sit and think like, I need to find a partner to help me get this story out, or do you just sort of follow what feels natural and see what stories come out of you, if that makes sense?
I think that we are all born into this world as very full human beings. And somewhere along the way, we get roped into someone else's radical imagination of who we are, where we belong, and what we are worth. And it takes a lifetime to unravel that and dismantle that from our psyche. Some of us are never able to do that work. Some of us choose not to do that work.
That's real.
And for those who do the work, it is not a one stop, moment for them. It is a continuous, every single day affirmation of the person who you really are. And you mentioned the articles that I published in Marie Claire and Elle. And I remember when I was publishing the Elle articles specifically, it was right around the Kavanaugh hearings. And I remember seeing
Mm,
Dr. Christine Blasey Ford go up in front of Congress, the sea of white men in suits, to tell them what happened, what her truth was. And that was the first time that I had seen someone publicly share their experience with sexual assault. And it was the first time that I had seen someone share their experience in front of people who didn't believe her.
mm,
And it inspired me to share a story from when I was a kid and I was kidnapped by three men and raped and found the next day. And when I reported it to the police as a 16-year-old, I was victim shamed
mm,
for wearing what I was wearing because I was wearing, lipstick, and I was scared. And I made a choice at that time to say that I was sorry and that I just wanted it to go away and that wasn't going to press any charges. And for a long time, I lived and leaned into that narrative of this shame, you know? And it's exactly what the system does. They got me.
mm,
But I remember when the Kavanaugh hearing was happening and I was inspired to tell my story, a really good friend of mine and I organized a rally in Washington Square Park, and it was titled hashtag why I didn't report it. And it was to create awareness around why survivors of sexual assault don't share their experience. Like what actually does happen? What are their fears? What actually has happened before that has kept people from being able to share their truth? And I did not know what I was going to be doing in this rally. I just knew that there was going to be a rally. It was the first one I had organized. And we put flyers all across the city, and we had hundreds and hundreds of people show up. And I remember sharing my story there for the first time, and it like literally took the breath out of me. And when I finished telling my story and I looked around, one by one, people started stepping forward to share their own story. And it became less a rally and more of a healing circle, because people formed this beautiful circle around the park to come forward and share for the first time. And that was the first time that I realized that I was not alone.
Mm-hmm.
That we are pushed to feel like we are alone in this, that we are isolated, that we are hopeless. But when you bring community together, when you are with other people who have had the same experience, where you can see yourself in that story, sometimes to know your truth, you have to hear it. And when you are in these spaces, you realize that there is so much more power and love, and that, as my father said as I was young, can really change the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so I bring that energy into the storytelling today, because I feel like so much about how we move through this world is based on the stories that we've been told, the stories that we believe, the stories that we've been indoctrinated in, whether it's through family, it's religion, it's culture, it's media. And how do you change those mental models? How do you choose to say no to these oppressive narratives and step into one that is grounded in truth and in love and in humanity, the very same narratives that we were born with? And it is my belief that the more that we can share these love narratives, the more that we can bring in that connective tissue, that we can bring people back to themselves. And it's a ripple effect, the more that we are able to tell these stories. I do think that it encourages other people to step forward, and the more that people do, it becomes
Mm-hmm.
a choir that cannot be unheard. And that is the vision with the storytelling. And the way that I share it is I share what feels right to me. And Joan Didion once said that, like, she writes to understand how she feels and to make sense of what is in front of her. And being able to share these stories, that's how I make sense of things. That's how I'm able to kind of understand. And when people chime in, it gives me more clarity and more healing and understanding and perspective. And that's how I move through it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing. So much of what you said is resonant, and even just this last thought about processing through sharing, that really, really resonates with me. I feel like I kind of moved into this work to begin with to process through working. I just felt like stopped up. I felt like I didn't have a productive outlet for the anxiety and the pain that I was feeling. And there's so many insights about how storytelling can be healing to trauma, just as you're saying, anecdotally, where I think some of the psychological benefits are, one, you can de-trigger yourself a little bit. You can, like, not in an unhealthy way, but just in a natural way, sort of desensitize yourself a little bit from being triggered each time the topic comes up. And I think that relates to an even stronger insight, which is that sharing stories of trauma gives you your agency back. Just as you're saying with, we can fit into other folks' narratives, or we can kind of take control of our own narratives and reconnect to our just innate narratives and our innate stories about ourselves and the world. Sharing stories of trauma gives you a sense to have a reclamation of that moment and what it means to you and about you. So I'm really, really resonating with what you're saying about, it's like funny, we're talking about using pain to make change, but we've not been able to talk about it without also talking about storytelling. It sounds like we're getting into an unspoken hypothesis that it's not just about having the pain inside and using it as your own motivator, but it might also be about sharing the pain, sharing the incidents, sharing what you've witnessed, what you've experienced, so that it can become a tool for healing and for action, which I think is really powerful.
And it doesn't have to come from this place that is powerless.
Exactly.
I think, so often the media and culture is a co-author to a lot of these harmful narratives that try to define us. And and they tell it from a scarcity lens. They tell it from a place of powerlessness and hopelessness, that and blame
Mm-hmm.
of whose fault is it? When we can actually recreate, reshape what these narratives actually look like from a place of truth and love. But it starts with us actually choosing to share it out loud and then encouraging other people to do so as well. Otherwise, we're going to be swimming in the same narrative ocean.
It's true. Without the disruption, everything kind of stays in the same stagnant place. But it's like there's all these paradoxes, though. So, on the one hand, sharing your trauma can be healing and can have this positive ripple effect. I've also read that it can trigger somebody else who's not there. And I think that's just like a reality. Like we're
Oh,
not
yeah.
always perfectly in step with our healing, but we have to take the risk that the benefit is going to outweigh any harm, and just remind each other to take care of ourselves when we're in spaces where we might be exposed to harmful ideas. But there's also this paradox between the burden and the opportunity of publicly sharing our painful experiences in social impact work. I feel like there was a period in my professional life in this space where the only place that every campaign that I was involved in pointed to was, and then we'll ask people to share their stories, you know? And it's like, I think there was like an awareness, a sort of coalescence of like, we understand the power of storytelling as a tactic in awareness raising, but also in just catalyzing action, getting the ball rolling on really realizing the change that we want to see and getting out of the sort of problem rumination state that you're alluding to with some of the media conversations. At the same time, we would run into these problems where it could feel like there was a bit of fatigue or a bit of, it was like a hard landing to go from, welcome to this initiative that we're running, this advocacy platform. Let's take a hard left into you sharing like the most vulnerable parts of yourself. And even internally, culturally, I remember a time I was presenting some research and I gave a certain set of stakeholders a little preview. And it related to, kind of like violence and targeting, race-based violence and targeting. And so I shared in the preview what my personal connection to the research was, what I was afraid of, the kinds of things that I talked about in my family and my community, and just kind of contextualized for this group of people why I thought I was convicted that these insights were important and that they could help unlock action and change. And then I went into the real presentation and I was kind of laying out the premise and, sharing with people what I was trying to build in terms of advocacy and interventions. And one of the stakeholders who had sat in the previous space interrupted my flow, my presentation, and was like, okay, but Kat, tell us like the story, tell us like what you're afraid of and what you think, and kind of tried to co-opt that opportunity of vulnerability for me. I likely would have gotten there anyway, because again, I'm a sharing person, but in the first instance, it was my own agency that led me to feel like not only is my pain driving this work, but I want to make it known that it is. In the second instance, it was someone in a more powerful position than I was in telling me, I want to hear that story. That's what it felt like. I felt very extracted from and exploited and completely derailed what was actually kind of a high stakes presentation for me, because somebody was demanding my vulnerability rather than silently inviting it by creating a safe space. And so I'm just curious, like what you observe as storytelling has become more of a tactic, and especially storytelling about hardship. I feel like we're now even past that, where many of us are doing work to be like, okay, how do we do this responsibly, ethically, because we're realizing how taxing it is. But do you ever either yourself experience a sense of burden from the role that your stories of hardship play in your work, or do you just witness it among the people that you're in space with or that you might support or collaborate with? That fatigue and that tension between wanting to add your voice to the chorus and needing to just sustain some emotional safety.
Oh, yeah. When going back to the story that I was sharing about the rally that I organized in Washington Square Park around the Kavanaugh hearings, I remember after that rally happened, I went home and I was like a complete mess. I did not prepare at all for the after of sharing.
Mm-hmm.
I did not prepare at all for the after of that sharing. I did not prepare at all for other people sharing and what was my role, what was my responsibility in that after, or like what does that look like? And it was hard. It was I didn't feel like myself for a little while after that. I felt broken. And I had to learn, what does it mean to take care of myself and be adaptable to that care in different seasons of life when other things are going to be required or needed. Um, and what I really started learning was just when you think about social change and what is required, that it's not so much about the solutions that our society tries to push. We're a very solutions focused society. We're a very immediate result focused society.
ROI, baby.
Yeah. What are your goals?
Give me the
Uh,
metrics.
yeah. And you think about all of these short-term solutions that are being pushed forth for centuries-old problems, and we don't yet think about what does it mean to sustain the solution? What does it mean to sustain the person who's leading that solution? And if the world is not going to do that for you, how are you going to do that for yourself? And so when I think about social change, when I think about the work that we do at Rosie, and particularly about the people behind Rosie, what sustains us in doing this work, it's thinking about like, you know, making sure that we are and that I am putting in triple the amount in than what I am putting out into the world. So if I know that I am going to be organizing a rally around gun violence, or if I'm going to be sharing my story publicly, that I have a plan set of how I'm going to care for myself before, during, and after. And it is not something that just comes out during these moments of vulnerability. They are consistent practices of care to sustain myself and knowing when to hit the accelerate button on them in these moments. So, after this podcast interview, like I will probably sit in my living room and close my eyes and listen to a meditation for a couple of minutes after even just talking about, some of my trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And, really trying to make sure that you're being very careful of your time and your energy. And everybody is very different of how they interact to that care for themselves. But being mindful that and knowing that you are human and that you are on a continuous journey of healing and that you're not um, you do not exist to be extractive, you exist to be
Mm.
to be, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way that I've been thinking about it for the past several years. And um, I think it's something that we don't often think about of how do we actually invest in ourselves.
Absolutely. I have a friend who uses the phrase vulnerability hangover,
Mm.
where you
Hmm.
end up like binging on
Yeah.
sharing your story and how you relate to the work. And then you're just like, okay, I'll see you guys in a couple days. like, like it's so necessary. And I feel like what you're saying is an important message on multiple levels. It's an important message to the individual professional or practitioner to not assume that you will bounce back just because your calendar says that after this you have some other meeting, you know? Like, how do you assume quite the opposite, that you're going to need restoration time and tools, even if it's like, I'm going to go sit on my patio in the sunshine for 3 minutes, you know, whatever it is worth doing to offset, like you said, that input output balance. But it's also an important message to folks in position of power, the folks who are shaping the jobs in this across this workforce. Because I feel that something that I found challenging, and I know several of my colleagues, it's like we're going to do work that is, to points you've raised, multi-generational, totally abstract, intensely emotional, but we're going to mirror one for one the practices of just a straight up, maybe production oriented, you know, kind of goods, traditional goods and services oriented professional approach, and then wonder why people are unhappy and bringing bad vibes or burning out, or my biggest fear, burning out to the extent that they no longer have any reserve in their tank to keep their career and social impact. I've seen that even in my own like small corner of the space. Like, I've seen brilliant minds and huge hearts just get tired and be like, I don't know, I kind of just want to like make money and go on vacation. This is too draining. And I'm going to take my skill set and like, you know, sell whatever, paper towels. And like, okay, that it's your life, it's your choice, it's your professional path. And I can't imagine that, you know, our challenges are going to just evaporate. I think we really need to be cultivating talent to be incentivized to stay with this work, you know, and without acknowledging that sustainability has to be consideration number one. It's kind of like, what are we doing this for? We're doing this to like get through. You can't have like a quarter by quarter mindset. You will
Hmm.
never be able to pass the baton. There will be no succession of the solutions that we're developing.
Hmm.
You know, there will be no sustenance, to your point, once the thing launches. You know, it's not the same as in other work where the launch moment is the end, it's the finale, it's the end of the race. We did it. Cheers, love you, get home safe. It's not that at all.
Hmm.
It's like this, it's usually this is the first glimpse into what's possible if there's enough resources, heavily weighted on human resources, to keep it alive and to expand it and to embed it so that we don't have to keep solving the same problem over and over again in different manifestations. So I really hear what you're saying.
I think we try to take on the task too much of doing it all on our own. And, you know, I think a lot of that is the system that we live in, to carry this on our backs with very little to zero resources. But I
Mm-hmm.
think what's been helping me has been just like really grounding myself in space and time, and being
Mm-hmm.
very clear about what is my purpose here? What is my
Yeah.
purpose here? It is not to completely change up every single legislation, because I'm not able to do that in my lifetime. But what is the intersection of my skills and my passion and my humanity?
Right.
And quite often, the answers are in our history. When we look at generations past, to my ancestors, to all of our ancestors, to the greatest social activists of our time, we see how they cared for themselves. We see how they led with clarity and purpose and community. And I even think about, like, Rosa Parks or like Angela Davis, who were huge yogis and had such a strong self-care practice and such a strong vision of what their purpose was and what they were going to set out to do. And I think the more
Mm.
that we can do that, and thinking that we are here to pass the baton, not to solve it all, I think that the easier it will be it will be to wrap our mind around what sustainability can actually look like for ourselves.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that a lot. Um, can I ask you a question about the opposite? Like, do just kind of like exploring, because I recognize some folks coming into issue space might not yet be working as a professional social change maker. They might be curious about it. Do you think that it is possible to do this work without a personal stake in it? Without, or maybe I should rephrase that, because all of our all of our lives are interconnected, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. So we all have a stake in everything that the other is pained by. However, I've been wrestling with this question of what is the role of representation in the sort of post DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion boom, and now a little bit of a bust. There were so many calls for, nothing about us without us. And how do we get the right voices who have direct frontline lived experience with issue area XYZ leading that movement? And I know I think my impression of your career is that you have a duality where you have some efforts that you've advocated for where you have an incredibly deep and painful lived experience, and you have others where you're supporting others' visions just because the nature of Rosie is partnership driven. So I'm wondering, like, what do you think if somebody feels called to help, but they don't necessarily have firsthand experience or a painful story to share with whatever issue they feel called into? How can they still be a strong ally, and can they feel equally welcomed and empowered in this work?
Yeah. You know, I think a lot of people struggle with the fact that there's so much happening in the world that it's like, what do you focus on?
Mm-hmm.
And is it bad to only focus on one or two or three issues? Like, how do I do it all? And the answer is that you're not supposed to do it all, that you have to, and it changes with different seasons in your life for sure, where like your focus is going to be. And so what I've shared with others is that you have to find what are you going to wake up fighting for every day? What breaks your heart the most that makes you get up and say, I'm going to try this again. I'm going to try this again. I'm going to try this again. And like I said, it can shift in different seasons of your life. Um, but being clear about like what that heartbreak is, it could be what's happening in Gaza. It could be that you're seeing your friend get laid off or be subjected to just extreme racism and sexism, giving birth at the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think we all carry these levels of trauma. I think that all of us have been prepared to explore it. And so if we could sit in it and explore it and unravel it, the personal is political at the end of the day. You can't solve the macro without the micro. You can't solve the micro without the macro. It's all interconnected. And so I think that the more that we can sit with ourselves and like what has happened, what is our experiences, what are the experiences of our community, the more we can get clear about like what direction we need to go. But I don't think that a lot of us have been taught that it's okay to sit with that. We are taught that resilience is putting on a mask and acting like everything's okay, when that is actually the worst thing that we can do, is to pretend that we've got it all together.
100%. 100%. Adrienne, so many pearls of wisdom. I just appreciate how you live and how you work and how you relate to people. I have an enormous amount of respect for you. And thank you for being in space. I want to wind us down. Um, Parting thoughts. You can answer all of these, some of these, one of these, but I'm very curious about three things. One, how you sustain yourself in this work, really more what keeps you motivated. And you've talked a bit about this, but if there's anything really tangible, replicable that people can learn from about how you stay motivated to get up the next day, push through the exhaustion, push through the overwhelm, and keep committed to this space. That would be wonderful to hear. I'm also curious about if there was one thing you wanted people to take away from our conversation today, what that might be. And then finally, if there's anything exciting that you're working on that you want us to know about. And I know of at least one thing, so if you don't say it, I will.
So I've got two things to offer here. One, I have a practice. I encourage everybody to think and dream about like what that practice could be like if you were to create a whole day to be the life that you wanted to live. Like, what would that look like? For me, it's the start of the morning when my kids are still asleep and I wake up and it is just me, it is my space, and it is my breath. I have a studied practice where I wake up at 5 in the morning.
That alone is impressive. At least for someone with a baby, where I'm like, no, stay asleep.
I know it was really hard for the first 2 weeks, and then my body has now just gotten used to it. That
That's
it,
great.
it is my time. It is my hour slot where I can be just me and myself, and I don't have to ask. I don't have to, be of service to anyone else except for myself. And I make myself coffee. I drink a big glass of water. I light a candle, and then I open up my journal and I write whatever has come to me that morning, whether it has come to me when I have first woken up or I have closed my eyes for 5 minutes and I say this mantra that I can begin again. And like, what am I hearing in my in space and in time and in my body? And that's what I end up penning. And that helps me to stay human, helps me to stay grounded. And I am much more full as I start the day than if I were just to wake up and be like running like crazy getting my kids to summer camp, you know? So that is a practice that I've had every day that has served me so, so well. And then I think the second offering that I have is to be in community. That, like I said before, that the world that we live in, the systems that we're in, when you're solving a broken system while living in a broken system, it is going to double time try to make you feel isolated. But when you are in community with others who have the same vision as you, and who are doing it with joy and love and laughter and just like levity too, um it's enlightening, and that's I get so much inspiration from working with our partners and working with other people within different community spaces who are doing this work. It's a great time, we know that we're not going to fix it tomorrow. Like, we're just here, we've shown
Totally.
up, it's good,
Yes.
and so the more that you can lean into that, life just feels lighter. Nothing in life is meant for you to do just by yourself. It's always meant to be done in community. And then your second question, I would say to believe in yourself, to how we live our days is how we live our lives. And if you can believe that that is possible, you can actually begin again. You can actually create the world that you live in. And sometimes the greatest change that we can have is what is happening within our four walls, is
Mm-hmm.
examining, if you're a parent, how do you parent? If you're a neighbor, how do you neighbor? How do you show up? And believing that you can do these things, that it's these small acts that make everything possible. And if you're you feel deterred being in this work with so much that is trying to push you away from the work, to focus on what is in front of you, because there's so much abundance there.
Hmm. Beautiful. Is there anything that you are working on that you'd like to share with the issue space community that we can keep an eye out for?
Oh, yeah. So I have been writing a memoir for the past 2 years. This is part of the reason why I wake up at 5 in the morning is to either pen it or like stare out into the unknown, wondering what I'm going to write for my chapter. And the L article that I spoke about, it went viral a few years ago, and I was touched by how many messages that I received on social media of people sharing that they how much it meant to them. And I wanted to share the backstory of that experience and also the forward-looking story of like, well, what happens after you share?
Totally.
What does healing actually look like after that? So hoping that will be ready soon.
Yes, I can't wait. Oh my gosh, I can't wait. And I feel like people in this community are going to be really, really inspired by it. Adrienne, I just like, when we talk, I feel like I've lit a candle. I feel like there's like a warm breeze washing over me. I'm like, you're telling me things I'm supposed to be interviewing you. I'm just like glazing over, absorbing the wisdom and perspective. I cannot thank you enough for joining and for bringing forth all of the parts of yourself and your past and your present and your future that you have. I'm so happy to have welcomed you in Issue Space. And that's our conversation today.
Thank you.
Of course. To everybody listening, thank you so much for joining us. Please visit issuespacemedia.com if you want to join our community and learn more about the space we are building for professional changemakers. And we'll see you soon.